In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Intel's board has been searching for a new CEO for more than 6 months, and the clock is ticking. We'll talk about who's in the running and who's not. Plus, PG&E's looming bankruptcy, the utility company filing for Chapter 11 in California in the wake of last year's deadly wildfires, could set off a chain reaction of events that will impact the state's energy policy. And the bike and scooter sharing industry is booming in Asia despite a broader Chinese economic downturn. We'll talk to one bullish investor in Beijing. But first, to our top story. It's been nearly 7 months since Brian Krzanich was ousted as CEO of Intel. And while CFO Bob Swan has been filling in for him ever since, Intel's interim CEO has repeatedly said he does not want the full-time job. According to sources, some of the top names that were on the wanted list are no longer in the running. Names like former Intel president Renee James, former Qualcomm COO Sanjay Jha. So where does the search stand now? What challenges await the next Intel CEO? To answer that, we've got, of course, Bloomberg's Ian King, who covers Intel, and joining us on the phone, Romit Shah, Managing Director and Senior Semiconductor Analyst at Nomura Instinet. Ian, I'll start with you. Who are the front runners?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. We should know. Throughout Intel's history, they've had this regular program of developing talent, of bringing people to the forefront and having it all kind of stage managed effectively. Krzanich left, obviously, early for reasons that weren't his own, and one of the other things he did was disrupt the senior management circle, so there was no obvious successor.
So there's no obvious front runner at this point?
There are a lot of theories and not a lot of clarity right now.
What are the theories?
Well, you have senior executives, people like Murthy Renduchintala on the inside. You had people on the outside like Renee James, maybe people like Kirk Skaugen, maybe people like Diane Bryant who could come back. But again, just theories at this point.
Romit, what would you like to see Intel do here?
My preference is for them to hire somebody externally. I mean, I think they've got some great candidates inside the company. Ian mentioned Murthy Renduchintala, who's a VP of engineering. But the business that Intel is in, I mean, things are certainly changing. Moore's Law is slowing down. They've got several businesses that are subscale, and I think some outside perspective would be helpful in terms of deciding whether to jump all in and really scale those businesses potentially through M&A, or shuttering some of those businesses and maybe emphasizing for better margins and cash flow.
Ian, the chairman recently suggested to employees that they might go with a non-traditional candidate. I mean, what do you take away from that hint?
It's a good point. There's a snippet from Andy Bryant, but that's kind of typical of Andy Bryant. He likes to make assertions and then throw things out to equivocate, just to get people comfortable with being uncomfortable. So we can read a little bit, but perhaps not too much into that.
So what are the challenges that the new CEO, once he or she is named, going to inherit?
Well, on the one hand, it couldn't be better, right? The numbers are fantastic. Intel is at all-time highs in terms of revenue, in terms of profit. Flip side of it is, if we are to believe what other companies are saying, this is the first time in Intel's history that they're facing competition that has better factories than them. Factories are incredibly important, and that needs to be fixed.
So, Romit, it could be, weeks, if not months, if there is no clear front runner. Does that concern you?
Not really. As the premise of the question is almost like Intel is really struggling and has a lot of problems. They need to bring somebody in to save the company. This is a stock that has outperformed the S&P 500 by 20% over the last 12 months. In 2018, as the numbers will show next week, they most likely will have grown their revenues by more than 10%, and they will most likely grow earnings more than 30% for 2018. So this is not a business that's broken. I think it's an important job. There are some long-term strategic things that the company needs to figure out, but let's not forget, Intel's coming off of really quite a spectacular 2018, and I think because of that, they do have they have afforded themselves some time to really bring in the best candidate that they can possibly find.
Interesting. Meantime, the FTC trial against Qualcomm, the FTC lawsuit against Qualcomm, the trial has started. Yep. Apple executives have been testifying. The COO of Apple testified that Qualcomm wouldn't give them chips to put in their latest phones. Qualcomm disputes that. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's central to Apple. Apple's really behind all of this, if you believe what Qualcomm said. Apple, in a way, has to portray itself as being weaker, as being kind of the victim of Qualcomm, which it's hard to imagine Apple being a victim. But if you look back to when Apple was first entering the cell phone market, they were coming late and they needed technology. So it's a sign of how much times have changed that we find something like that to be shocking. But to answer your question, Qualcomm has publicly stated in the past that they would have given Apple all of the chips that they wanted.
All right. Well, I know you're continuing to monitor that trial for us. Ian King, Bloomberg Tech, Romit Shah, Nomura Instinet. Thank you both. Coming up, Microsoft wins a massive contract from the U.S. Department of Defense. Doesn't mean they have the upper hand on future bids. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. The U.S. Defense Department has awarded Microsoft a $1.76 billion five-year contract. The work will support the Defense Department, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the U.S. intelligence community. This is separate from that massive Pentagon cloud bid that is still ongoing, with Microsoft and Amazon in the running. Bloomberg News' Naomi Nix covers corporate influence for us. She joins us from Washington. So what is the significance, Naomi, of Microsoft winning this contract in the context of other contracts still open?
Yes, well, it certainly helps Microsoft as it continues to make its case to the Pentagon that it's the best company to be the sole, to be a major cloud provider for the Defense Department. What it essentially means is it's deepening its relationships with the Defense Department, with the IC, and those relationships will only help it continue to attract new business within the department, including potentially this JEDI Pentagon cloud contract.
Talk to us about the status of the JEDI Pentagon cloud contract. I mean, there was some concern, certainly among tech companies, that Amazon was a shoo-in, and other companies were not happy about that. In fact, the CEO of Oracle actually brought it up to President Trump.
Yes, Oracle and other tech companies have been fiercely opposed to the way the Pentagon has been handling this contract. They say the Pentagon, made the wrong decision when they decided to award the contract to only one provider. So most in the industry suspect that Amazon is still the front runner for the contract. But actually, Microsoft is seen as a solid second choice and has the potential to have an upset here. They have extensive, existing relationships with the Defense Department. This deal will help them, but also recently, earlier this year, they got another deal with the IC to extend its cloud technology there. And so, we'll have to see where the DoD lands on this. But I think at the moment, Amazon is still looking like a front runner.
So what's the timeline? When is the DoD going to decide?
Well, the DoD has decided that it's going to, announced previously that it was going to make a decision on this contract in April. But we're going to have to see, because tech companies are still fighting it. Oracle has filed a lawsuit in the federal claims court saying that the Pentagon's requirements are unfair and overly narrow in favor of Amazon, and also alleging that there are conflicts of interest, that people in the DoD had close connections with Amazon. So we'll see. Maybe a judge will tell the Pentagon that you have to change your approach, or that there was some improprietary issues here. So at the moment, the Pentagon is still planning to make a decision by this year, but whether they'll get stopped by the courts remains an open question.
All right, Naomi Nix, I know you're continuing to track that decision for us. We are waiting for it anxiously. Thanks so much. Well, PG&E stock plunged Monday after saying it plans to file for bankruptcy in California. This as the cost of wildfires left it with $30+ billion in liabilities. 2/3 of PG&E's market value has been wiped off since November's wildfires in California, and its debt has been downgraded to junk. Meantime, the bankruptcy could have big implications for California's ambitions for renewable energy. Here to discuss, we're joined by Michael Wara, Stanford University Director of the Climate and Energy Policy Program. So, Michael, is this pretty much expected?
Yeah, I think this has been coming since November. Shortly after the Camp Fire, PG&E drew down its revolving credit lines, which is usually a warning sign for a company that they're going to file. And the reality is that the market has concluded that, along with Governor Brown, has concluded that this is kind of the new normal. And until we can change that market perception in California, it's going to be very hard to finance utility investments.
Fires are the new normal.
Fires, catastrophic fires.
So PG&E blames the fires on climate change. PG&E's critics blame arrogance and negligence. Which is it?
Well, I think there's a variety of factors. Climate change is one of them. But it's also important to emphasize that PG&E has essentially they haven't tried to make big changes in how they run the grid that would create safety in the near term. They focus on kind of long-term investment plans that are comfortable and traditional for utilities to make, but which don't provide big changes right away that would have protected them.
What kind of big changes should the company be making?
Well, I think the key question is the degree to which the company should be shutting off the power during risky times in wildfire areas. And they've talked about that. They did it once in October, but did not do it prior to the Camp Fire and the November catastrophe. And the question is how the company is balancing risk and political opposition from ratepayers, the PUC, and the state government.
Right. So why not shut down the power?
Well,
I mean, we're talking about hundreds of homes gone, dozens of people who've died.
It's the pushback that PG&E encounters, all utilities encounter when they turn off the power, is pretty severe. There are vulnerable customers that have medical devices in their homes. Local governments can have trouble with emergency services, even supplying water to communities. And the solution is to create safety in the power system, but also provide the backup power that's necessary to make it much less inconvenient when the grid is not supplying energy, because it's too dangerous to do it.
So they don't have those backup plans
That's
in
right.
place.
That's right.
So how will this bankruptcy impact the state's energy ambitions?
Well, I think the first place to start thinking about that is in terms of the impact on affordability of energy, right? And California already has some of the highest electricity rates in the country. This is going to make them significantly higher, kind of no matter what happens, whether PG&E is able to avoid bankruptcy or not.
So we're going to feel this as consumers?
Absolutely.
We're all going to pay more?
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. Then the question is, how much more can we afford to make the investments we would like to make to achieve our climate and clean energy goals? We are going to have to be even more careful, even more crafty about how we achieve those objectives over the next 10 years, how we electrify transport, how we electrify buildings. All of that requires investment in grid infrastructure. And that infrastructure just got a lot more expensive.
So the state has a goal to be, for all of its electricity, to be 100% carbon-free by 2045. How likely are we to make that?
I actually think that we can still achieve that goal, but recognize 2045 is very far in the future. The goals that are more pressing and that are going to be more challenging to achieve are the 2030 clean energy and climate goals, right? The renewable portfolio standard targets for 2030 and the state's greenhouse gas emissions targets, which basically require a significant fraction of vehicles to turn from being gasoline powered to being electricity powered.
So what does it mean for investments in electric cars, in solar, in the shorter term?
Well, the ecosystem is threatened by this, the whole clean energy ecosystem that operates in California, because so many of the providers of solutions have signed long-term contracts with PG&E at fixed prices. And if those contracts are a part of the bankruptcy process and are marked down, we could see many companies in big trouble. Utility solar providers, battery storage companies, perhaps electric vehicle charging, the kind of infrastructure companies that are part of the electric vehicle ecosystem. That all is threatened by this bankruptcy, and we're going to need to be...
Like Tesla? or just the charging
I think Tesla
network?
is fine. It's more the companies that you would plug your car into, the companies that are more closely associated with the grid and with PG&E.
So there's no doubt there will be high winds again this year, dry conditions. How well prepared are we, or is PG&E if this happens again this year? Do you think they've learned a lesson?
I would hope that they have learned a lesson. I would hope that the new management is thinking about this from a risk management perspective that's a little bit different than they were prior to this year's fire or last year's fire season. But the reality is that power shutoffs are still controversial. The October shutoff in the Napa Valley area prevented at something like 25 ignitions that were caused by trees falling into the infrastructure. Luckily, the infrastructure wasn't turned on. But had it been turned on, we would have seen a bunch of fires started. So at the same time, customers were really upset by that safety-related shutoff. So the question is, how aggressive is the company, the new management, going to be in the context of bankruptcy, in the context where they're negotiating with the state about assistance, about this safety-related program? The reality is they're not going to be able to harden the grid because they can't invest right now.
Right. Michael Ra, Stanford University. Fascinating and very important stuff. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me on.
Coming up, we will give you a front row seat to Shenzhen's tech boom, how the southern China city became the Silicon Valley of the East. And we're live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. 40 years ago, Shenzhen was a small fishing village in the shadow of Hong Kong. Today, it is China's very own Silicon Valley, packed with more than 20 million people. The megacity has become the biggest consumer electronics manufacturing base in the world, bursting with hundreds of factories. Bloomberg Businessweek's Ashley Vance traveled to Shenzhen to experience the city's factory life firsthand.
You hear about factories in China all the time. Today, I'm lucky enough to actually go visit one that's located about an hour outside of the center of the city. They're going to let us see what life is like inside one of these factories.
There are grim factories. There are decent factories. And then there's this place, run by Grandson Electronic. It's safe to say this is not what I expected. The plush surroundings are intended to make customers from all parts of the world feel comfortable. But inside, it's more like you'd expect. Dozens of workers moving at Shenzhen speed, making fancy headphones for an Australian company called Neura.
How did you guys end up in Shenzhen? I guess that's the thing to do these days.
Yeah. Shenzhen's known as a place that people come to make things.
Yep.
You don't come here to mess around. You come here to get things done. They have the supply chain here, a supplier that can make any component of the headphones you need. And of course, there's the labor cost, which is not as cheap as it used to be, but still reasonable. The production line has been running at basically maximum capacity since we started. And yeah, we can do 500 a day normally.
What are the little noises we hear in the background?
You're hearing them make sure they assembled the speaker correctly.
So that's like a test noise?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
But what is life like for the people who make these wonderful toys? To get a taste of the factory experience, I joined the Mad Dash for lunch. Cafeteria food.
Nice to meet you. How are you? Good. How's the food?
Okay.
It's good. How long have you worked here?
2 years.
Okay.
It's tough to say anything terribly new about the life of the Chinese factory worker. Most of these people have come from China's hinterlands, often leaving their families behind in their rural hometowns. They'll spend about 2 years on average in Shenzhen, busting their butts working overtime to save up as much money as they can. Is it a step up from hardscrabble subsistence farming? Probably. Are there still safety nets? Yep. But I can tell you one major lifestyle advantage the Chinese have over us Guilos.
When we first started working here, after lunch, we couldn't really get anyone's attention. Eventually, we cottoned on. Everyone's just sleeping at that time of day. That said, we embraced it very quickly.
What is your preferred sleeping apparatus?
I'm pretty Spartan, so either on the desk or under the desk with a bit of bubble wrap for a pillow. Trust me, it's good.
Bloomberg's Ashley Vance there taking a little nap in Shenzhen. You can watch the full episode of Hello World at Bloomberg.com. Well, Samsung unveiled a set of inexpensive smartphones for India, seeking to regain ground lost to Chinese rivals, including Xiaomi. The 3M series devices are priced below 20,000 rupees, about $283 US. They'll launch February 5th on the Samsung India online store as well as Amazon India. An exec at Samsung says the devices are aimed squarely at the millennial market. Norwegian authorities have opened an investigation into Tidal, the music and video streaming service owned by Jay-Z. The investigation follows reports by a Norwegian newspaper that the streaming service falsified streaming numbers for artists including Beyonce and Kanye West. Beyonce, of course, Jay-Z's wife. The probe was opened after Norwegian arts associations claimed potential loss of income due to data manipulation. The company has denied the reports. Coming up, competition in bike sharing on overdrive. But is the market oversaturated? Hello Bike co-founder Lee Kai-ju says the industry has developed too fast. Our conversation with him is next. Plus, Slack may be taking an unconventional path to the public market. Will other expected tech companies follow suit? This is Bloomberg. Global Link. I am Emily Chang in San Francisco.
I'm Sherian in New York.
And I'm Hadi Stradwatz, also here in New York.
Well, there's new pressure on Chinese negotiators to reach a trade agreement with the United States. China's foreign trade slumped at the end of the year. Exports were down more than 4% in December, while most imports fell almost 8%, both the worst fall since 2016. Sherry, I want to ask you, does this Chinese trade data just pile on to concerns about a macroeconomic slowdown this year?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen U.S. ISM manufacturing survey really at a 2-year low. We also got data from Germany now showing that they're in the brink of a technical recession. And now this Chinese data really not boding well for the global economy. In fact, we have seen U.S. markets take a hit in this session. Tech stocks really falling the most in more than a week. Now, this GTV chart on the Bloomberg just showing that analysts have been cutting their EPS forecast for global companies by the most since 2009. Although I gotta say, today the U.S. markets were under pressure, but as soon as we heard President Trump say that he thinks the U.S. will reach a trade deal with China, we did see those risk assets pair declines.
So, Heidi, what about the reaction in Asia? Does this ugly data put more pressure on Beijing to cut a deal with the U.S. before this additional set of tariffs kicks in?
Yeah, it is ugly, isn't it? And the thing is, we had these lowered expectations already, and they were worse even than those estimates that we were expecting. There's two arguments. One is that sometimes bad data out of China means good news for markets because you get a higher level of monetary stimulus, perhaps, from the PBOC. On the other hand, it does kind of call into question how much leverage Beijing has going into potentially a high-level round of trade talks with the Vice Premier Liu He, because the problem is, Emily, as you would well know, a lot of the low-hanging fruit when it comes to, opening up and amplifying trade deals and trade volumes has already been picked, essentially, and a lot of the remaining issues when it comes to this trade war are the deeper, longer-term structural issues like institutional reform, like tech transfers and intellectual property protection. I want to bring up this chart because it it goes to the latest kind of overture made by Beijing to kind of open up its natural markets, which is really to double that QFII, the qualified institutional investor quota, to $300 million. The problem is investors, foreign investors, are just not getting into Chinese stocks. This is taking a look at turnovers when it comes to domestic Chinese markets, A-share markets, and they hit the lowest since 2014 last year. We've had so far this year, days, we've had a tenth of really daily volumes trading in China. So there's a question mark over whether foreign investors really want to be involved in domestic markets. And I know, Emily, from your perspective, when it comes to the trade war, it's certainly affecting animal spirits and sentiment when it comes to tech investors that do business with China as well.
Absolutely. Important context there as these trade talks continue. Meantime, the Chinese bike-sharing startup Hello Biked, which is backed by billionaire Jack Ma, has confirmed it's considering an IPO. The company says it is well-positioned to dominate in this sector as financial woes mount for its competitors. Co-founder Li Kaiju spoke exclusively with Bloomberg's China correspondent Tom McKenzie in Shanghai.
Hello Bike has been the #1 in this industry since April 2018. Our daily rides are equal to the combined rides of Mobike, Ofo, and Didi's Chinju. Put simply, we take half the market share.
What's your strategy for monetizing what is essentially a capital-intensive business?
Relying on the revenue from daily rides is enough, and we've proven this. In over 100 cities, we break even from the daily rides.
People started off by viewing the sector with great excitement, and they saw that it was able to solve that last mile problem. And then you started to get pictures of mountains of bikes piling up and stories about these bike sharing companies burning through cash and very quickly collapsing. So you've done something you would claim right to avoid that. What is the strategy you've taken to ensure that you've managed to stay above some of those issues?
In the first 1 or 2 years, this industry and our industry peers developed too fast without following basic business rules. They put too many bikes into the market, which is a waste of resources.
What are your future funding targets, and what do you see your current valuations sitting at?
In the short term, we don't have fundraising plans, as we're very well capitalized for the moment. If needed, perhaps in 6 months, we might consider a new round of fundraising. We are valued at around $5 billion right now.
There's been some speculation that SoftBank might be looking to invest in your business. Is that a conversation you've been having? Have you at least entered into discussions with SoftBank?
We had contact with SoftBank, but there's no substantial development or anything that gets us closer to a deal yet.
Is an IPO an eventual objective for the company? And if so, what kind of time frame might we be looking at?
We will definitely go public at the end of the day. We don't have the timetable yet. Our business is still rapidly growing. When the time for an IPO comes, I believe our company will be valued at tens of billions of dollars, much more than it is now.
And that was a Hello Bike co-founder and executive president Li Kaiju with Bloomberg's very own Tom McKenzie there. Well, joining us now to further discuss investing across bike sharing, that sector and others in China. Carl Louis, who's the partner at DCM, joins us in Beijing. Carl, great to have you. Look, you know, the growing pains of the bike sharing sector in China, the sort of level of consolidation we've seen recently are pretty well documented. It's not been an easy year in the past for the likes of Mobike and Ofo. Are you still positive on the sector?
Yes, I am. I think that you know, in the U.S. in particular, we've seen the rise of the scooter share market. It's really nothing that we've really seen before, and I think that in the U.S. market, it very much will be around electric. I think in China, there's obviously been lots of pains, but Hello Bike has proven that they're continuing to execute very well.
It's interesting to hear you say that, Kyle, because we've had, tech predictors on the show who look at the scooter sharing market and think that's just one that's not going to be as big as some people think it could be. And of course, in Asia, you've got the threat of regulation from the Chinese government. GD Chuxing has run into some growing pains there. Who's to say they're wrong?
Well, I think that in the U.S. market, the cities have been very proactive about regulation, and that's actually helped to limit, the oversupply that we've seen in China. I think that the Chinese market is obviously the biggest in the world. The other scooter share markets are really focused outside of China. If you take the U.S., Europe, the Middle East, and Latin America, those markets combined are comparable, if not bigger than China.
Carl, but how much of this broader success, both within China and then across borders, as you say, you seem pretty bullish in other markets as well. How much of that depends on regulation, as Emily just pointed out, but also policy when it comes to urbanization and the development of infrastructure to be compatible with that vision of the future?
I think longer term, certainly the scooter companies will need to work very actively with the cities to introduce better bike lanes, safety, to really educate the public. But we're starting to see early innings of that now. If you look at Santa Monica, for example, they now have dedicated scooter parking. They have much better bike lanes. They have areas where the scooters are restricted in terms of the speeds. And so I think in the U.S. and other parts of the world, you're starting to see the scooter companies working much closer to the governments now.
Kyle, we've just gotten a raft of disappointing import-export data from China. We've got this revenue forecast cut from Apple, from Samsung. Is any of this concern about a more macroeconomic slowdown, a slowdown in China more specifically, changing your investing strategy?
Not necessarily changing our investment strategy, but we're certainly worried. I mean, the data that's coming out, I think, really are lagging indicators of things that the global venture capitalists like ourselves have been well aware of from the past prior months. It certainly does concern us, and it makes us very selective about the types of investments that we look going forward.
What about the trade war, though? Does that impact animal spirits and the way that you invest, or even just what you're hearing from, early stage investments in terms of impacting the level of confidence that you're seeing and potentially impacting, given one of the main issues is intellectual property and this kind of battle for tech supremacy? Does that potentially play out negatively?
I think it really depends on the sector. As early stage investors, we have not really seen the impacts of the trade war yet for a number of our companies, but we're certainly very conscious of CFIUS and the CFIUS regulations that continue to evolve, and that's made us very thoughtful about how we look at cross-border investments.
Tom asked the HelloBike co-founder about SoftBank. How much competition are you seeing from a mega fund like that? And is that impacting how you do business?
Well, DCM has a long-standing relationship with SoftBank that goes back decades. We've known them very well. We think that net-net, it's a positive development for the ecosystem. We are not really that impacted. We're very focused on seed, Series A, Series B. SoftBank really is at the later stages. But what we have seen are companies that typically would go public are now going to SoftBank for sort of the SoftBank IPO and staying private much longer.
Carl, your two themes for 2019 is scooters, which we've already covered, and cannabis. You're saying cannabis this is the year for it. I'd say that it was also the year for it last year in terms of how much hype we had. What do you expect to happen this year for it to be further more profitable and monetized for investors?
I think 2019, for the year of cannabis, we really do need to see positive growth and extraordinary data come back, particularly in the markets in which we're full legalization, Canada being one. I think everybody's looking to the Canadian market to see if the numbers really do come back where they are. Otherwise, really those valuations, I think, will be troubled.
Carl, really great to have you on with us. Thank you for spending your time with us here on Bloomberg Television. Carl Louis, DCM partner, joining us there. We're going to get lots more on Bloomberg Television next. This is Bloomberg.
While a slew of companies like Uber and Lyft prepare for IPOs this year, Slack may choose a less traditional route to the public market. The messaging platform said to be eyeing a direct listing, choosing to sell its shares directly to bidders. 2019 is expected to be a banner year for tech IPOs, but market volatility and the government shutdown may lead to some delays. Here to discuss, Gainsight CEO Nick Mehta. Gainsight makes customer success software for companies like Slack, giving them unique insight into a host of how well companies are performing. So what do you make of Slack's potential decision here?
Well, none of us know exactly what Slack is planning, as you know. But I think what's unique about Slack is that they're not your average cloud company. A lot of people talk about cloud companies being unicorns, and that term gets used a lot. Slack is the unicorn's unicorn. It really is one of the most special private cloud companies out there. They've got a brand that's unbelievable. Every other cloud company looks up to them, not just because of their revenue growth, but their product, their culture, and they're a company that's raised so much money that they don't need more capital. So if anyone could do a direct listing, it's Slack.
Well, there's reports that Airbnb might be considering this as well. I mean, do you think this could become a trend or tempting for other companies trying to get out the gate?
I think it's a trend for the very upper echelon of companies. I don't think it's a trend that you're going to see dozens of companies doing this. I think that there's some companies, because there's some companies that have built so much power and so much brand over many years, right? Companies like Airbnb and Uber and others and Spotify were private for so long, but most companies don't have the ability to do that. Either they're not as well known because they're behind the scenes, like a B2B company, for example, or they actually need more capital. Most SaaS companies need more capital as they go into the IPO.
So Gainsight is one of those companies that always comes up, in terms of people expecting you to come to market at some point. What's your timeline? Is this causing you to sort of reflect on how you decide to do this?
Well, as you know, we're kind of behind this big cloud trend as companies move more to cloud and subscription. So we think there's a huge opportunity for Gainsight and our whole space of customer success long term. So we're here to build a big long-term company.
So what's your timeline to go public then?
Well, we're focused on a timeline to be around for a very long time.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about your business, because customer success management software.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that LinkedIn actually named Customer Success Manager the top 3 most promising job of 2019. What is driving that?
Yeah, so if you think about customer success being such a buzzword in the cloud world, it's because of this one metric that every cloud company reports. That metric is called net dollar retention. The idea is, if I start the year with $100 million of revenue in my existing customers, how much are those same customers spending at the end of the year? Are they growing with me? Are they spending more money? Are they leaving me? Customer success is all about how do I get my customers to stay with me longer and spend more money over time. And as you know, in the cloud businesses, they lose money up front because they lose money getting these new customers. If those customers don't stay with you, the cloud business model doesn't work. Customer success is about making the cloud business model work.
So who's winning in the cloud?
So in the cloud, fundamentally, obviously the customers are winning first and foremost because they have this ability to then come whenever they want to the cloud and use the software anytime they want, but also leave if they want to, right? So the number one winner in cloud is the customers. But on the vendor side, the winners are the ones that are able to keep their customers longer. I'll pick an example, Twilio with 170% net dollar retention, meaning if a customer is spending $1 at the beginning of the year, that same customer is spending $1.70 at the end of the year. Twilio is growing with its existing customers. Even if it doesn't get any new ones, it's going to grow really fast.
Now, I know there's different sort of battlegrounds within the cloud, and it's not a zero-sum game. But when you look at like Amazon versus Microsoft versus Google, do you see Amazon sort of always in the lead with the first mover advantage, or do you think their piece of the pie will shrink?
Yeah, so if you look at the public cloud and where you host your applications with all those huge companies, one of the amazing things is the power and recent success of Microsoft. Microsoft is just showing up so much more as people think about where to put their infrastructure.
Well, and the DoD just awarded them a, almost $2 billion cloud contract.
That's right, exactly. And a lot of sectors like retail, for example, don't want to host on Amazon. Amazon's amazing too. Amazon does a great job with all this innovation. What's awesome is there's so much competition now, which is more choice for customers, not to even mention Google.
So does this become a commodity?
No. There's so much innovation to be had in the cloud at every layer, from the infrastructure layer to the application layer, that it's not about commodity. It's about all these companies taking the trillions of dollars of spend that used to be inside data centers and moving it into the cloud.
Now, I know Salesforce is one of your investors.
That's correct.
But what about on the Salesforce side and that kind of customer management software?
Yeah, so Salesforce is an amazing partner to Gainsight, and one of the things that they've done is blaze this trail of the idea that you need to do your business in the cloud. And one of the things that I think Salesforce customers have recognized is when you're getting new customers with Salesforce, you acquire them, you get those clients, how do you get them to stay? And many, many Salesforce customers have chosen Gainsight as the platform that works with Salesforce and gets them to stay.
We've seen a lot of consolidation over the last year in this space. I mean, do you expect to see more of that? would you be interested in M&A?
Well, we want to build a big long-term business ourselves, although we certainly may acquire companies in the future. But we think that there's going to be tons of consolidation in the cloud. But one of the things that's really unique is there also going to be lots of IPOs. It's amazing how many late-stage, very at-scale companies, maybe not as well known as Slack, but they're ready to go public in the next couple of years when the window is good. So you're going to see a huge surge of SaaS.
Does the market volatility, does the shutdown, does that concern you?
Well, I think it concerns everyone in general, but if you think about the SaaS business model, it's one of the most resilient out there. It's all about the idea that I'm getting predictable revenue over time. So if any business does well during a period of economic uncertainty, it's the SaaS business model.
All right, Nick Mehta, CEO of Gainsight. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks for stopping by. I'm going to come back to you on that timeline later this year. Still ahead, new drone proposals by the US FAA could dramatically expand civilian flights. What it means for the future of commercial deliveries. Next, this is Bloomberg. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration unveiled a series of proposals Monday that would, for the first time, allow drones to fly over crowds at night. The long-awaited proposal would dramatically expand civilian drone flights, which could be a launching pad for companies like Alphabet and Amazon exploring commercial delivery. Bloomberg's Alan Levine joins us from Washington to discuss. So, Alan, so many questions here. Safety, of course, is top of mind. What is the significance of this?
Well, from the industry standpoint, this is huge. They've been waiting for this for years. It's actually been delayed as the FBI and the Homeland Defense folks try to figure out how to prevent against terrorist attacks and all that. But it finally moved forward. They came up with a framework that'll allow flights over people. It's actually pretty straightforward. You know, if it's really small and won't hurt people, then basically that's okay. And then as you get larger, you have to take steps like limiting the speed or putting padding on it and covering the propellers and that sort of thing. But this could have a huge impact going forward.
So it's interesting in the context of over the holidays, both Gatwick and Heathrow airports shutting down due to reports of drone sightings, and then police could never find evidence of drones and can't rule out the fact that there were never drones at all. You know, what actually happened there?
Well, the fact is we don't really know. The police in near London, arrested a couple and then had to release them, admitting they didn't really have anything to do with it, and so we're sort of left with not knowing. And frankly, though, that really, I think, says a lot about the risk of security risk of drones. There are various technologies that can help you track these devices, but they're not all that reliable, at least not 100% reliable. And so you're sort of left with this situation where this sort of thing can happen. Now, I would say that the FAA action today is trying to address this. They're moving forward on parallel tracks, and they're going to require tracking drones just so this sort of thing at airports doesn't happen.
So to be more specific, these proposals would allow drones to fly over crowds and at night. Meantime, you've also been covering the impact on the TSA of the government shutdown. What is the latest there?
Well, the impacts began to really mushroom today at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, which is the busiest in the United States. We saw, I guess, volume increasing today, but that triggered long lines at TSA. The airport had to shut down a couple of entry points, TSA security entry points, and so people were being funneled into, they shut screening lanes, not entire entry points. But that created long lines, people were waiting over an hour. TSA tries very hard to keep that wait down to maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes in some cases. So that could really be disruptive. And we saw things spreading to Houston as well as here in the Washington area at Dulles International Airport as well.
All right, important information there for anyone traveling. Alan Levin in Washington, thanks so much for that update.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Be sure to tune in to Bloomberg TV and radio tomorrow. We're going to be covering UK Prime Minister Theresa May making a last-ditch attempt to win lawmakers over to her Brexit deal. Our coverage starts 6 a.m. local time in London. Bloomberg Tech, of course, live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. You can follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter as well. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.